So I've been watching a documentary on the French and Indian War. There's been a total of four of them, and I watched the last two, and they really didn't add the they kind of really fluffed things up in the last two just to kind of get cover some time. Not sure why they just didn't make it a three-part series instead of a four-part series, but so the first part of the war was out in western Pennsylvania where we are, and then war kind of shifted to central upstate New York, along the St. Lawrence, Lake George, present day border between Vermont and New York. So 1758 and 59, there were some battles at Fort Ticonderoga where the English were initially kind of pushed off by the French, but the French finally took in 59, they took Fort Ticonderoga. And the reason they did was because the British really increased the number of soldiers they had fighting. They kind of tripled down. And the French were not putting a lot of money and resources into fighting the English in North America. So even though the French had better tactics and were successful in 56 and 57, taking Fort William Henry and Fort Oswego, the English began to kind of gain ground by just dumping money into the conflict and more manpower into the conflict. So by 59 and 60, the British were kind of taking advantage of the fact that the French didn't have nearly the number of men and armaments that the British did. So in the James Wolfe, English general, attacked Quebec in summer of 1759. And Quebec is interesting that it's built on a plateau with cliffs on two sides and very hard to attack. And eventually the English were kind of they found like a pathway up through the cliffs, and they got to there was a plain next to the city called the Plain of Abraham, and they somehow got Montcalm to come out of Quebec was fortified, come out of Quebec and attack, and the English easily defeated him. Montcalm was killed. Wolfe was killed also in the battle, and within days that Quebec they announced that they had been defeated and gave the city to the English. Following summer, the General Amherst came from the west and attacked Montreal. Montreal fell without a fight, and so things were really winding down for the French. Later parts of the war. So the Treaty of Paris wasn't until 1763, but there wasn't any fighting between 60 and 63. In that time, though, by the time 1763 came about, the Native Americans really didn't like dealing with the English and preferred dealing with the French. French would give them gunpowder, give them arms, would give them presents, just to kind of keep them appeased, and the Native Americans really liked that. And the English did not treat the Native Americans as well that way, even though they had managed during the war, it kind of won them over, and that was a big part of the English's battle plan, was to kind of pull the Native Americans away from the French. But when the fighting was done, the English didn't really pay much attention to the Native American, to the Indians, and So there was a Native American named Pontiac that conducted a rebellion, and from after 63, that's when he started, took over a lot of the forts, that British forts all through the frontier areas, and Bushy Run is an example. It's out in off of Route 30 near Route 30 in Westmoreland County. Is a famous battleground, but that was one of the battle sites against the Native Americans in 1763. But the big picture, the British weren't happy about having to kind of pay for all these battles and wars that were going on in the colonies. They made the proclamation in 1763 to try to keep the English. They weren't allowing anybody, the Crown wasn't allowing any settlers, any land grants out past the Appalachians. They were trying to keep the settlers on the East Coast and away from the West, where they knew they just were going to run into problems and require money to defend them against the Native Americans. And they were also they had doubled their debt, Britain did, during the war. Their amount of money that they owed was extremely expensive to conduct. And they were looking for ways to tax the settlers. And so they came up with a series of taxes that proved, this was after 1763, proved to cause a lot of friction between the settlers, because they really didn't feel like they didn't have any representation. So why should they didn't have any voice in Parliament. Why should they have to be responsible for paying taxes if they weren't being represented? And they were building the roads. The British were just defending them, and a lot of the fighting was done by the colonists anyways. So the British gained, they had this system where the English or the Americans were providing raw materials, and they were the colonials were being forced to purchase goods exclusively from Britain. So Britain was benefiting significantly from the trade with the Americas for the colonies. And so the Americans really didn't feel like they should have extra taxes, which would, by 1775, the American Revolution began. So that's it for the French and Indian War. There'll be some questions regarding my little video here, and hopefully you guys were able to pick some things up here and remember some of this. So I'm going to sign off here. Thanks for watching.